back, everyone. We're here at CPAC in Florida, sitting down with Representative Ronny Jackson from Texas. And real pleasure having you on Crossroads.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
And so Texas has been kind of on the front lines of pushing back against, federal law that they don't see as constitutional.
Right.
And it's bringing up an interesting debate in this country over where does federal power end and where does state power begin. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this? How is this battle kind of being fought between these two systems?
Well, obviously, I'm a big state rights guy. I think that the federal government needs to stay out of our business to the absolute extent possible. I don't think they get paid to do a lot of the things they do. I think they get paid to provide a defense for our country, and I'm glad they do that. I don't think they really get paid to educate our kids, and we shouldn't even have a Department of Education in my mind. That should be a state and local issue. But you're right, there's so many things in the Biden administration, obviously, they'll try to take control of every issue they possibly can and make it a federal issue, and they're trying to do that now. Texas has been pushing back on a lot of issues. The most recent year I think you were referencing was the immigration, where our Attorney General won a case against the Biden administration regarding immigration. But they really want to federalize everything. The Biden administration does, and the Democrats in general, to be honest with you. And I'm not in favor of that at all.
And we see Texas leading the charge on this, and really right from the get-go. I mean, within the first couple months of Biden being in office, passing over 40 executive orders very quickly, and Texas stood up almost immediately to challenge the constitutionality of these different executive orders.
Right. Well, thank goodness we have an Attorney General and a Texas government that's willing to do that, because somebody has to do that. If no one pushes back, then we'll lose our voice altogether, and it just won't matter. And so I think Texas has always been very independent. We want to stay that way. We recently had this thing with our power grid, and we lost a lot of power, and it was in large part related to the fact that we had too much wind energy, a renewable yet completely unreliable source of energy, especially when all the wind turbines froze like they did. And the first thing the Biden administration did was start a big push to say, well, that Texas grid that's not a part of any other grid in the country that's independent and solely within the borders of Texas needs to be taken over by the federal government and connected to the grids elsewhere in the country. And that's not needs to happen at all. We're proud that we have an independent power grid in Texas. We need to maintain that. That's up to our state legislature to figure out what happened with that grid and to put in any regulations that need to be in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. We do not want federal regulations as a result of that. But if you have a government that has a weak attorney general or a weak central government in your state, the federal government will walk all over you, and they will take control of your freedoms in your state. And that's what we're seeing in around the country, but not in Texas.
And so with the power grid issue, and terrible what happened with Texas, but it seems there's two competing narratives. One is that, it was this green energy that was not reliable and failed, which caused the problem. And now you have the federal government stepping in and saying, no, it was because you guys aren't connected to the power grid and it failed, but had you been connected to the power grid, it'd be okay. And so they're using this to try to use the federal government to gain more power, essentially.
Absolutely. And the power grid, aside from that, we'll fix we did have some issues with the power grid. We'll fix that. But the real issue is that, we were getting over 40% of the electricity that was being produced on a day-to-day basis being dumped into that grid was coming from wind energy. And the Democrats won't endorse anything but wind or solar. It's part of their new Green Deal. It's part of their green plan, right? But all the other sources of energy that we've had over the years, nuclear, coal, natural gas, those have been downgraded because of the big explosion in wind energy. And that's partly our fault in Texas, because the federal government created a lot of incentives, a lot of subsidies to make that happen, right? And they subsidized a form of energy that they were pushing out as renewable, which, yes, it's renewable, but they were forgetting about the fact that it's incredibly unreliable in extreme heat when the wind's not blowing, whenever it freezes and the turbines freeze. It went from 40% of our production of energy in our country, or in our state, to zero overnight as soon as the turbines froze. And we didn't have the base energy and those other forms of energy, the carbon forms of energy that we traditionally had, to fill that gap. And that was a problem. We relied too much on this green energy, this renewable source of wind energy. We need to get away from it. We've got too many windmills in the state of Texas right now. We need to go back to providing a larger part of our energy with nuclear, with natural gas, with coal, and with other carbon forms of energy. And that will alleviate this from happening again. But if anything, this was a condemnation of the left's new Green Deal and the fact that they want everything to be wind and solar.
And now they're pushing to take over the power grid in Texas. What can be done to stop that?
Well, they're not going to do that. We're not going to let that happen. I don't think that they currently have the authority to do that. So we'll try to stop that. We'll try to fix. We'll try to police ourselves and, like I said, figure out what happened there and make sure that we put regulations in place from a state standpoint that need to be there to make sure that the infrastructure is taken care of. Because a big part of what happened was the money wasn't spent on winterizing a lot of the grid, and some stuff froze that shouldn't have frozen. We'll fix that, but we do not need the federal government's help doing that. I learned a long time ago, if you open the door and let the federal government come in and take control of anything, they will make it into a massive bureaucracy that wastes all of your tax dollars, and they will break it in the process, and we don't want that to happen. Another thing
Texas is on the front lines of right now is pushing back against big tech censorship. And here at CPAC, that's one of the big themes, is America Uncanceled. What is Texas doing to push back against big tech? Well, we're just, our Attorney General is going to continue to be a part of lawsuits that go forward against the federal government when they're trying to take our voice away from us. And they really are just seeking out conservatives and people that may have supported President Trump and that don't agree with their far left, socialist, Marxist, communist agenda, quite honestly. And it's a cancel culture. If they agree with anything you say, no matter what it is, they have the authority right now to cancel you. And that's enabled. They're being enabled to do that because they're in bed with social media, with Twitter and Facebook and all the other forms of social media right now, as well as the far left in the press. The press is controlled by the far left right now, and they're complicit in all of this. Now, going forward, people are really concerned right now about the integrity of the elections. There's still a lot of Americans who don't think the elections were fair. They saw, for example, governors overriding state legislatures, changing election laws. And Trump is talking now, coming out, we think tomorrow, going to be talking about his new move to take back the House and the Senate, which needs people going to the polls and voting. But a lot of people don't trust in the election system. What's being done to restore voter integrity, to make people actually trust the system again? Well, that's going to be up to the states. Unfortunately, each state's going to have to figure out how to do that. We as a federal government, we as representatives for our state, as federal representatives for our state, need to push our state legislatures as well as all of the constituents in the state to make sure that the state legislatures do what's constitutionally required. The Constitution says that only the state legislatures can dictate how the federal elections are conducted. It can't be county clerks. It can't be attorney generals in the state. It can't be governors. It can't be other elected and unelected officials that change the rules at the last minute to favor one party over the other. And that's what happened this time. They changed the rules so that they could get universal unsolicited mail-in ballots, so that they could get rid of signature verifications and a variety of other things that benefited the Democrats by making it easier to carry out election fraud, and that's what happened. That's what happened with this last election. We have to make sure that doesn't happen again, and I think people will do that. People are looking at what happened after the fact. We have to look forward to start with at this point. What happened happened. We have to play the hand we're dealt at this point, but it doesn't mean we have to accept it, and it doesn't mean that we don't have to stand up and demand change. And we should demand that change. We should reestablish election integrity, and then people should look around and see what the alternative is, because I think that's what's going to bring our party together on the Republican side. Is they're going to see all of the craziness that's going on the far left right now, and people are scared. And so people may have been disgruntled. They may felt like initially they didn't want to vote anymore because it didn't matter, but I think people are going to get over that in a hurry when they see the stuff that the Dems are going to try to push down our throat. Now, another big one right now is this gun restriction move, this new move on gun restrictions being promoted as common sense gun control. Yeah. Which includes some pretty radical things. For example, banning certain types of magazines, banning certain types of weapons deemed as assault weapons, and even going after gun manufacturers and removing their legal protections so people can sue them for gun crimes, apparently. Now, Arizona is talking about making Arizona a sanctuary city for guns, for gun rights, and using actually the same sanctuary city policies for immigration that the Democrats put forward. Is Texas considering anything similar to this? Well, I hope so. We should be doing that. And I've had people in my district reach out to me on the county level saying they want to make their county a sanctuary county for the Second Amendment. And we should do that. We should make our entire state a Second Amendment sanctuary state, right? And, it's not the federal government's job to decide what kind of weapon I can own. The Constitution says I can own a gun. It doesn't tell me what kind I can own. It's not the government's job to interpret that. And, it ignores the fact that it's not law-abiding citizens who
who buy and register these weapons and use them legally that's the problem. It's all of the illegal guns that are out there on the market. Nothing's being done to that. If they want to stop gun violence, they should start focusing on the illegal use of weapons in places like downtown Chicago and in large cities like New York and Philadelphia. And they should round those guns up, those illegal guns that are out there that are being used in gang violence. That's where we should clean things up from a gun standpoint. They do not have the right to tell me as a law-abiding citizen that I can own a weapon or what kind of weapon I can own. That is my constitutional right.
Now, again, the big picture here, I think, is state rights versus federal government rights. And as the federal government puts laws into place, can states really challenge these laws? And to what extent can they do it?
Oh, they have to challenge those laws. I mean, that's how it gets to the courts, and hopefully the courts are the deciding factor. So states are going to have to stand up as things happen. As the Biden administration and the Democrats start enacting a lot of these executive orders and start pushing through, now unfortunately pushing through laws even because they control the Senate and the House, it's going to be up to the states to push back on this and to make a big deal out of it and get it to the courts so that the courts and eventually perhaps even the Supreme Court can hear the cases and decide one way or another whether it's constitutional or not, because there's a lot of stuff they're doing out there related to immigration and related to gun control. It's completely unconstitutional. I mean, anyone can see that, but they're getting away with it because it's not being challenged and brought to the courts. But it will be, and that's why I think we have a good Attorney General. We have somebody who's out there who's fighting for our constitutional rights in the state of Texas, and other states are going to have to join that fight and do that as well.
Now, one thing we saw when Trump was president, was that some states pushed back against what he was doing by just decriminalizing things. The sanctuary city policies were like that. Also, a lot of the drug policies, legalizing marijuana was decriminalizing. Different states basically using the powers of the states to override federal law by kind of bypassing it and making it so that it just wasn't prosecuted within the state.
Right.
Is stuff like that happening in Texas? Where do you see this
That's
going?
not happening in Texas, but that happens routinely in places like California and New York, California in particular, where they just ignore federal law. And that's got to stop. I mean, and it's going to be up to individuals a lot of times in those states, unfortunately, because their state government is controlled by the far left as well. It's going to be up to individuals to bring cases against the state for these issues that will ultimately end up in federal court as well when they're not enforcing federal laws that are on the books. And they're getting away with it.
So what you're saying is this isn't about ignoring federal law, it's about challenging federal law.
Yeah, it's about challenging, whether or not the federal law is being enforced like it's supposed to be. The laws are in place. If the law's in place and it relates to immigration or whatever, it has to be followed. It's a federal law, right? But states, like you said, they don't want to follow the federal law, so they're just choosing within the state to ignore the federal law, and they shouldn't be able to get away with that.
And now, what we're seeing right now in the U.S. is a lot of Trump supporters feel like they're under attack. A lot of them are being labeled as, domestic terrorists, even by some public officials at this point. And a lot of people are concerned about the very, very far left policies going through. I mean, really overtly socialist policies going through, and they're worried about the future. I've heard this as kind of shock and awe tactics. You do things so drastically and so aggressively that people kind of sit back and say, wow, there's nothing I can do about this. But we also see now kind of a growing grassroots, and I'm curious where you see this heading.
Yeah, it's going to continue to grow because Republicans by nature, especially folks that have been part of this America First, Keep America Great agenda or this movement that the president started, they're not wired that way. And they're not wired to roll over. I mean, the Democrats traditionally do that, and that's how they control a lot of their party. They just assume that if they push hard enough that they'll give up and they'll roll over and they'll let it happen. But Republicans aren't going to do that. Most of the conservatives I know are not going to do that. So it's dangerous. I'm concerned as well about the attack on the right from the left and the way that they're coming after all of our basic freedoms, especially our freedom of speech. But I think that hopefully they're going to overplay their hand here, and we're going to be able to. And I think the first way that happens, unfortunately, it's going to be 2022 before we have another election where we can really change things. But we've got to get the House of Representatives back. We almost won it this time. We were supposed to lose 15 seats. We won 16 seats. We went from a 41-seat minority on the Republican side to a 9-seat minority. And so we are poised. We were 5 seats from winning the House back. We're in a position right now to take the House back. We've got to get it back as soon as possible to stop this nonsense and to regain our constitutional freedoms.
Great. Thanks again for being on Crossroads.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.